thank you everyone for turning up today. And particularly thank you to Archana Deshmukh for, there's been a story to how we managed to get this being put online. And it's one of the experiences of COVID, I guess, where we've all learned how to act online, and it's enabled people to connect across the world in a far more interesting and equal way than anything normally happens. And it's also, there's been some interesting byproducts, and for me one of them is just having a sense of involvement and connection, engagement with people in different parts of the world, which and the postponement of this lecture earlier on in the spring with difficult circumstances, and it just reminds us how connected the world is when we come to these sorts of, it's a sort of different way of thinking about this community of scholars on a global scale, and it's a community of scholars with a relationship of care as well as intellectual interest, I suppose. But it's been really nice to bring this, to be able to put this on again as part of our autumn semester, and it's really nice to be part of the Strongholds of the World ongoing Strongholds of the World seminar series. So thank you to Rainer, Dieter and others for that. And it's really nice to see some people such as Do-Won who gave a presentation earlier on this year. Nice to see a friendly face coming back again to get involved in this discussion today. So as Rainer said, I'm the David Harvey, Director of the Materials, Culture and Heritage Research Program at Aarhus University, and through which one of the partners in this enterprise putting this seminar series on. Thank you, Rainer, for getting this set up and for managing to negotiate through the licensing agreements, webinars and everything. There's a lot of effort's gone in behind the scenes on that. So it's really nice to see this actually taking place. So I would like to welcome Archana Deshmukh, and who is going to be talking to the title Coastal Defences of Maharashtra. And I think I'll pass on to Dieter to do the more formal welcome in terms of the context of fortifications of the world and everything. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So, warmly welcome from me, from the Marburg Working Group. I'm just a normal part of the group, and I hope I can supersede our first chairman, Dr. Christian Ottersbach, who is now in Trieste in Italy and looking for the next castles, fortress and fortifications. And also want to say hello to Katrin Mashinek, our second speaker from this group from Strongholds of the World. Hello, Katrin. Okay. To Archana Deshmukh, it's a practicing principal conservation architecture of Nadezhda. Please forgive my bad English and also how I pronounce the English words.
That's fine. It's Nasadiya.
So sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Nadezhda, architectural and conservation firm based on Pune, Maharashtra. She was pursued architecture degree from Maharashtra and master's from New Delhi in architectural conservation. She has been in the field for more than 12 years and has worked in Rajasthan, Maharashtra, and Gujarat on various projects related to forts and fortified places. She studied a Marriott student in the master's thesis about maritime coastal cultural landscape of coastal Maharashtra. In 2011, in February 2007, she organized a tour for Fortress Group for forts and fortifications of coastal and western Maharashtra with support of NCS4, also organized a seminar in collaboration with MTDC, ACI and State Archaeology, along with various NGOs working in forts in Pune, Maharashtra. Archana Deshmukh is an architect. She studied architecture at the Kashmir Dr. D.G. Patel College of Architecture, Pune University, and Architectural Conservation at the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi, where he made his master in 2011. Since 2012, she is director of the firm Nasadeh Architecture and Conservation and Employment Conservation Architecture for the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums in the Maharashtra state. Since 2015, she is also assistant professor of Singhed College of Architecture. She is a member of ICOMOS and coordinator of NCS for ICOMOS India. Warmly welcome.
Thank you very much, Dieter, for such an extensive introduction. Thank you very much, David Harvey, for the welcome note. And thank you, Aarhus University, and the very interesting program of Material Culture and Heritage. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk about my experience and the topic that I'll be presenting today with such a lovely and accomplished panel that we have. And this is the third webinar of series Strongholds of the World. And it's basically interdisciplinary lecture series on research program, materials, culture, and heritage. I'll be talking about coastal defenses of Maharashtra, India. And I'll begin with the presentation. I'll be talking about this coastal defenses as, let's go to the slide number 1. Yeah, this is the map of Maharashtra. India has currently 28 states, and there are 11 states which are the coastal states, including the states and the union territories. Union territories being Goa and Pondicherry, and even a part of Diu and Daman. So right from Gujarat to Maharashtra, then it comes to Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, part of the western and part of eastern states become all the coastal states of India. There are 28 states in India, out of which 11 are coastal states, and Maharashtra is being one of the largest states, has area of 30.77 million hectare, and the coastal part, which is stretched across, this is the part is bounded by Western Ghats at the east and Arabian Sea at the west. This extends from north to south. Maharashtra has the longest coastline of around 720 kilometers long, and this coastline has witnessed very rich maritime history with trade and commerce, which has been flourished since ancient times. This part, which is bounded by Arabian Sea and the Western Ghats, which is famously known as even Sahyadri mountain range, is a land between these two known as Konkan, very famously known as Konkan. This entire Konkan coast is divided into 6 administrative districts since 1961. And this region is traversed by seasonal showers, seasonal rain, and heavy monsoon rainfall from the hills, which are located here, which is from the crest of the Western Ghats. The spurs of Sahyadri gradually lower towards the coast. They lose the height and they gradually lower towards the coast. And it stretches, they create promontories, they further in the sea, they create islands. And these are few of the distinctive features of this coastline. The topography and physiography of this entire region is significant part of cultural landscape. And this has led to the establishment of many fortified heritage, port towns, coastal forts, island forts, even the hill forts in this region. So effect of geography upon history is one of the major part building this coast and building the very defense character, because this area was always connected to the land as well as to the global regions, to the foreign regions, from as far as Europe to even east through the sea trade. This is the effect of geography upon history. This particular map shows how the physiography of this region works. Part A are basically part where the Mumbai is located. These are the wide Konkan plains. The part B are almost no coastal strips. So these are the rocky outcrops, or where we have the cliff areas of the cliff. And part C are some open stretches where we can find the beaches. So the entire coastal line is granulated and concurrent coast. And that is why it was very easy to sell throughout the coastal line. This is a part of Sahyadri range. As I said, it gradually lowers towards the coast, and as far in the sea, they create small islands. This particular map shows ghats and the trade routes. Why the coast was important? So this Sahyadri range, the Western Ghats, create the Konkan coast as one of the important phenomena. Why? Because the Sahyadri were the basic division from the Konkan to the areas, the landward areas. So the Ghats connected from this particular land areas to the Konkan coast. So these Ghats were important points through which the trade happened in the past. So at the hilltops and at the foothill, the forts of this region came up, and the rivers which flew through the Western Ghats, and at the mouth of the creeks, there were a lot of port towns and defense structures came up. So movement by land for the trade was very difficult due to mountains and the woods, and the river traffic occupied the prominent place. So the rivers which came through the Western Ghats, they sailed downwards, and at the mouth of the creeks, they unloaded their products and loaded to the big ships or the big crafts. This led to the establishment of the ports at the river mouth or up the creek. The pattern of the trade was mainly of two types. The first can be called as the loop type. So these are the major ports. So these were in the loop, which was a local trade, and the other was a long distance trade with which was basically the global trade. So the coast of Maharashtra was known from very ancient times for its ports from very extensive trade, which was carried on to places as far as west as Rome and as far as east as Java and Sumatra. This place was well known and mentioned by Ptolemy in the Periplus as well, and many other the ancient references that we get. The commercial relations with Egypt and Babylon existed as far back as 2500 before Christ. So basis on this coast of Maharashtra, we have delineated the Konkan coast in three parts. So this is the delineation. This is the upper Konkan, this is the central Konkan, and this is the lower Konkan. The upper Konkan is basically where the Mumbai lies. So this is more of an urbanized area. The lower Konkan is where we have very few beaches, and the coast has almost no coastal strips. So there are basically cliffs with and some part of which are the beaches. So this is where the lot of industrialization has happened. And the central Konkan is where we have both. There are some open stretches, there are some cliffs, and the central Konkan is important because this is where the Sahyadri Hills, that is Western Ghats, lose the height and creates promontories or even the islands within the sea. So this part where we can find a lot of interesting fortified heritage in terms of defense. So why the delineation? This is Upper Konkan, the Central Konkan, and the Lower Konkan. The recorded number of forts are written here. In Upper Konkan, there are 34 number of forts. In Central Konkan, there are 25, and in Lower Konkan, there are 18. So in total, there are more than 70 forts in this particular region. This particular area, the coast is little shallower and wider with very few hills. That is why the urbanization took place in this area in much more. In Central Konkan, the coast is rocky with very few beaches and the mountain range is closer to the coast. See, the mountain range is little closer to the coast, whereas in this area, it is little away. And Lower Konkan, the coast is mostly rocky and even more isolated than the Central and Upper Konkan. So these are more isolated plains. In Upper Konkan, the land is fertile and is more accessible to the invasions from the migrations from the north. And in Central Konkan, there are creeks at the mouth of the rivers provided protection to the smaller craft with shallow draft, of course. And in Lower Konkan, there's moderately high hills which afford some protection to the shipping during monsoons. Then there are rivers, there are tributaries to these rivers. There are creeks formed in these areas. There are forested areas, which are the designated protected forest. There are island forts, and there are fort and fortified heritage. So there are also, once important shipbuilding center located in Upper Konkan. Then Chaul being important trading center from where the other fortified heritage came up. In Lower Konkan, there is a Dabhol, an important harbor, which is protected from the southwest monsoon. So this is also very important in terms of defense, where again, the geography shaped the history of this area. This is a very interesting map showing the fortified heritage along the coast. We have mapped the dark circle shows the island forts and the light circle shows coastal forts. We will be talking about the different typology of these in the next few slides. The island forts were basically the western frontiers to the global trade, which are very important frontiers from the west side. And all the other forts which were at the coast or at the mouth of the rivers were basically for the protection of the ports or the forts or even the port towns and even the shipyards. So this system is very important. If there were landward attack, these were the frontiers. And for the trading areas, for the trading ships and even the trading activities, the island forts were extremely important and which are very peculiarly located at the mouth of the creeks. So many traded at the Konkan ports in a perfect safety, right from Arabs, Greeks, Chinese, Jews, Parsis, and even Portuguese. The trade and commerce with the Middle East and Europe had been going on from the ancient times. When the European powers arrived at the western coasts, the ports and the coastal forts became their intrinsic part of their activities and political aspirations. That is kind of very important point why the coast of Maharashtra became very important. In maritime forts of coastal Maharashtra were basically built to guard the commercial and the territorial interest. They narrate stories about the trade routes, piracy, battles, and above all aspirations of mankind to travel to the new territories and for the betterment. So the forts therefore must see as a symbols of such aspirations, and more specifically as important historical, architectural, cultural heritage. To understand the coastal fortified heritage, it's very important to be aware about the geography and how the defense system evolved during these times. So the military warfare, establishment of regional powers, the cultural resources built by them, which includes various typologies of forts, the defense mechanism to protect the boundaries, the maritime and coastal forts as historically linked with one another for the defense strategy rather than merely individual pieces of the fort architecture. And whether in today's context it's possible to one again link two or more forts from the heritage point of view, it will be a very important, one of the important aspect of defense mechanism in that case. It's very important to understand how this entire area shaped through the history, because this is how the development of defense mechanism took place in this area. So even in very early, like in 5th century, trade was very limited. And since ancient times, the Konkan coast is known for its ports used for extensive trade, far west empires of Rome or eastern ones like Java, Sumatra. The factor that the long coastline provided opportunity of this is a 720 kilometers of coastline. So that provided a greater visibility, and that was used as an advantage for trading and transport of naval ships. And as I explained in the physiographic maps, the ships could sail hugging the coast, absolutely very close to the coast. So that was another, because the entire coast is shallower. So that was another advantage for the ships to do the global trade as well as the loop trade. So this map is showing important trading centers on the Konkan coast. So even in the upper and the central area of Konkan was known initially. And as the trade grew, this was the trade going on for many, many centuries. And these are the trading activities with the global areas. The internal trade was carried out through the cultural routes, through the ghats and the passes. And these are the important centers. And the dotted lines are basically internal routes which connected to the bazaars or the marketplaces. So from the Western Ghats, the trade of many, many items took place. And then in exchange, the trade to the inner part of Maharashtra happened. This particular map shows the circle of powers. So 14th to 16th century, after having few of the major port centers or the trading centers grew, and even the trade grew as the new powers established in this area. The Gujarat kings, the Portuguese, which came in 16th century, early 16th century, the Bahmani kingdom, when the Delhi Sultanate broke up, Bahmani kingdom came into this particular area, and the Siddhis became the ruler of part of this area. Siddhis were the Abyssinian slaves which were brought by Bahmani Sultanate, and eventually they became the kings of Chaul Rajpuri and even the Janjira, part of Janjira. They became rulers of this area because they had an excellent knowledge of sea. Then some part of lower Konkan where the Portuguese established themselves, and they shifted little towards the south when the arrival of Siddhis happened. So this is how the circle of power started developing, because trade became lucrative over the years. And in this just another century, another 200 years, and this was the trading, these were the trading activities. Trading activities were in the loop. The internal trade became lucrative. The cotton, silk, brocade, the chintz, the cotton goods, gold, silver, inlay works, then the indigo, then the muslins again, and even the spices, pepper. So these became a few of the product which became very popular trading products within this region. And with Daman, Vasai, Mumbai, Chaul, Dabhol, Rajpur, Vengurla, Goa, Karwar, Honavar, Bhatkal, Barcelona and Mangalore, these became the very important trading centers. So in this area, Portuguese established their power. Just here at the Bombay Islands, the East India Company established themselves. At the Dabhol and Chaul area where we had Portuguese and Siddhis. Then in Kulaba and little down south, Angres, which were the regional power, established themselves. At the Savantwadi also, the Khem Savans of Savantwadi established themselves. And the Malvan to Panhala, that is just the tip above Goa, where the part of which was under Maratha kingdom of Kolhapur. So this is how the trading activities grew and new centers came up, new regional powers came up. Regional powers understood the importance of this region when the foreign powers came into existence, and that is how regional powers understood the importance of the area, and they established themselves at the Konkan region, which were initially towards the land side. This is another important map showing the linkages from the rivers, ports, and the important forts. Now, in another slide, I explained there are recorded 73 forts in this region, but this is a list of major 15 forts, and other were the supporting forts to the major forts. So those are the primary forts, secondary forts, fortified outpost. I'll be coming to that typology in next few slides. So these are the major rivers which are flowing towards the west from the Western Ghats. Then the port came up at the mouth of the river, and the major fort established as a defense mechanism to support the port and to basically defend the port. So this is the list of those important forts. And this is how the geography helped these ports to establish themselves. This is a very interesting map of a part of central Konkan. I'll just go back to few slides to explain from where this comes. So that particular slide was a part of this central Konkan, and this is the part, the area in between two major rivers. This part I'm going to explain. So this is a river Kundalika, and this is Dabhol Creek. And this area in between these two creeks is around 37 kilometers. This is Chaul Revdanda Korlai, which had a Portuguese influence, and it was very major trading center run by Portuguese. It was established by them. And this is Janjira, which was under Siddhi rule. So these two, at such a short distance, these became the very important powers of this center. So these are historic settlement of Chaul Revdanda. This is Korlai, this is Borli Barshev, then the Kashid. This is wonderful part of Fansad sanctuary. This is a sanctuary. So this is the hilly region which loses the height towards the coast. This is formed as a promontory in the sea, which is wide open in the sea towards north. Then as it loses height, it creates islands within the sea. So these islands became the island forts. And at the mouth of the rivers, there were the port towns and fortified heritage. So there was a lot of commerce going on through the centuries, and this commerce created conflicts, and conflicts made them to create fortified outposts, fortified port towns, and the forts and the fortified heritage. So classification as per geographical setting and construction system in Konkan region, there are three major types of forts. One is coastal forts, second is hill forts, and third is island forts. So in coastal forts, there are subcategories like coastal forts at the coastal plains, at the coastal highlands, and the military outpost on the promontory. So forts or defensive strongholds located along the coast, mostly at the mouth of the creek. So these are at the mouth of the creek, or where the river is opening into the sea. So these forts had two types based on geographical terrain. So Chaul, the part of Chaul is little flat and the part of Korla is little high. So coastal plains are basically functional fortified strongholds located along the coastline, either on the beach or a seashore. So this is on the beach and this is a seashore, occupied by the troops to defend the position against the attack. For example, Fort Chaul and Revdanda. So there is a coastal fort at Revdanda. This is wonderful. Ecologically also, this area is just wonderful because there are a lot of mangroves also along these rivers, and there are paddy fields as we go up. The Korla is culturally wonderful area, and I would like to note for Rishika, because this area is interesting because there is ethnic cultural community and it's very significant for their unique language. And the language is basically a mix of Tulu, Bengali, Sanskrit, Portuguese, even a part of Dutch and English. And they have even carols in their language. They consider themselves as descendants of Portuguese. And they have very fantastic art and craft in terms of making a local beer and a local oil to protect their fishing boats. So these are basically fishing community, but they have wonderful art and craft and making different oils and different beers from a peculiar fruits from this particular Fansad sanctuary. Then these are some architecture, these are some fishing hamlets and agriculture oriented activities communities. And at the down south, we have another historic settlement of Murud Rajpuri from the Siddhi dynasty. And this is known as an invincible fort of Siddhis, Janjira. So the second category in coastal forts is basically coastal highlands, which is a secondary fortified military outpost, mostly used for a supervision or to control from the higher terrain along the coast. So Samarajgarh near Janjira, which is hardly, which is in the ruins today. So this is on a higher land, on a higher elevation. And then third category is military outposts on the promontory. So this is basically high point on the land or at the ridge projecting in the sea. So this is projecting in the sea beyond the line of coast overlooking the lowland. So this is a fantastic location from where the supervision also happened, and even if it was a first line of defense. Fort Korla is an excellent example of using natural terrain for its best defense strategy. The ridge on which the fort is located is a part of extended portion of Western Ghats reaching out in the sea. It's wide open in the sea, and it's further extended, or the broken portions make island into the sea like a suitable build island fort. So Padma Durga or Kasa Fort or a Janjira Fort are the part of this another category. So this is Janjira, this is Janjira, this is Samrajgarh, and this is a Padma Durga. And this is a Korla. This is a wonderful fort. It's very small, but its location is just excellent. So this is wide open in the sea, part of which loses the height again, and it almost reaches the sea. This part where I've shown the brown patches are the rocky outcrops and the white patches are the part of the beaches. So the entire coastline, if you see the NH4, the road goes along the coast and it's a very scenic area. So this is Revdanda and Chaul, which was a very famous port town established by Portuguese. And the fort type is land battery forts. So coastal defense and a coastal fortification are military interventions aiming at the provision of protection against military attack or any attack near the coastline. Because of the trading activities, these attacks were very likely, and purpose of defense system was mandatory and very evident in these areas. So the purpose of invasion, the attacking army requires a safe harbor or a port for sustaining operations, and hence such defense strategies located around ports for defense to prevent the army from gaining access to the land. So internal attacks, there was a fort here, and from any external sources, a Korlai fort is located here. So this particular fort gets the 360-degree view all around, even at the sea and even at the land. Historically, the term battery referred to the cluster of cannon in action as a group, either in a temporary field position during the battle or at the siege of the fortress or the city. So this is the kind of geography where we have a flat lands here, few beaches here. This is the Fort Korlai, and this is again a highland. This is a part of the designated sanctuary. Then the second part is hill forts, which are basically, it's a wide variation type basically. And during Middle Ages, this typology grew faster, and they would be functional as a defensive strongholds when there were tensions. And undoubtedly, some of them were attacked and destroyed. The fort in Mumbai may be classified under following types based on a topography and a construction system in general. So the headland, this type built on a hill or a mountain, on a spurs of mountain, strategically located near the trading routes. So primary purpose of this was defense and also to collect the toll from the traders. Then the hilltop contour is basically example of the fort built over the hill or a natural rock in formation of higher altitude, having the island location with the construction of artificial ramparts and the steep natural slope for the defense purposes. So Sion Fort is one of the examples which comes within the Mumbai city. The third category is island forts, which is one of the very important category in a coastal defense. This is isolated tract of land or a rock completely surrounded by water and surrounded by defensive walls suitable as strongholds. So these forts are basically suitable for the trading activities and as a military outpost based on the size of the island. So Fort Murud Janjira is one of the finest example of this typology. This was the sketch developed by me in my master's days. Let's go to the next slide. So this is explaining how the Western Ghats loses the height as it reaches the coast, also forms the promontories, which is a excellent geographical feature of Western Ghat. These are the extended portions forming the promontories surrounded by water on all three sides and connected by the land at one side. And these are the island forts. So, and these are the secondary forts on a coastal highland, which are overlooking the island fort. So this is a main island fort for the supervision, for the trading activity, loading, unloading, and this is for the defense purposes. So this is, even if at this as a frontier, this was the first line of defense, secondary fort. These are the photographs of Janjira, and this is Korlai Fort. I'll be explaining these forts in detail in my next few slides. This is another fort which was built by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, which is a Maratha king and a ruler who established himself in 17th century And he is the reason Maratha Armar, that's a Maratha Navy, was established. This is another wonderful fort at the southern Konkan, that is a lower Konkan. So the defense character. So there are island forts. We have 11 island forts, and there are around 71 coastal forts with ASI and State Archaeology Maharashtra. ASI is basically archaeological department, Archaeological Survey of India, and State Archaeology is a state department which looks after a few of the forts. So defensive character of the forts being, it was built on promontory to desire to occupy higher ground, and it was always a basic tactical concept. Forts of Maharashtra and Konkan can be called as main forts. All were the main forts, and whose military use was far greater than any political or administrative value. Secondary forts were supporting the main forts in a substantial manner, like outposts whose tactical value was quite limited at that time. So system of main forts being surrounded by ring of secondary forts and the further outer ring of outpost, and then some military value could have been ascribed to them. So not all forts along the Konkan strip were important from a naval point of view or even administrative or any political, but they were built, most of them were built by Portuguese as fortified trading post, and the value was meeting the local needs. Let's study defense in depth, where the defensive measures were taken care of by while positioning the fort itself on a strategic point. While talking about the defense in depth, the difference between the defense of a fixed vital point and a vulnerable point and a general defense of the area between static and mobile defense is something very important when we study the overall defense system of the fort. So the vital point may be the fort itself, or a pass, or a town, or a river crossing. And the area which is to be defense are basically the border of the kingdom or the vital area of the kingdom. So the vital point is protected by the main fort, and the screen of secondary forts and fortified outposts are basically to cater the needs, local needs, and also to cater the needs of the main fort. The forts along the Konkan coast were built and protect the ports and other trading ports. Migrations could be expected as a large number of Abyssinians and even Parsis did come to this area. Portuguese came to western coast to establish themselves to control trading activities and to establish their rule over the areas as they considered vital for their trading and naval interest. Large number of forts and fortified outposts were built by Portuguese along the Konkan coast, since their purpose was protect the shipping activities, and that is why they were built at the mouth of the creeks and the rivers. So the last paragraph explains how the creek and how the forts came up. So these are different creeks where the different forts are located. Now we will zoom into further more specific areas, and this particular plan shows Korlai, as I showed even a Google image of that. So this is the plan of Chaul, Revdanda and Korlai. So Chaul, Revdanda and Korlai. This is the whole circle, is a very important Portuguese historical settlement. So Chaul is situated on the north. It's a right bank of river Kundalika. This is river Kundalika, where it meets the sea. The area was known as a Lower Chaul. This area was known as Lower Chaul, and it was dominated by Portuguese settlement. And in the medieval period, Chaul became very important port and a military station of Portuguese. Having secured the northern bank of the river by building the Revdanda fort. So this is Fort Revdanda. This line is Fort Revdanda. The Portuguese tried to get hold of a ridge of Korlai. So this is a ridge of Korlai, which they succeeded only after a bitter struggle. And this is a part of Revdanda, which is basically a fortified port town, where you can see some some high towers, which were the watchtowers, basically, some granary areas, and there were the wonderful bastions for the cross defense. So this is the old part of fortified port of Chaul Revdanda. The Korlai. So this is a plan of Korlai Fort. This is about 100-meter long, but only 30-meter wide at this widest point. So the widest point is this, and this is very narrow. There are 7 terraces. So these are different terraces. And this particular part, which is this, which almost meets the sea towards north. So these terraces are protected by the wall and gateway. So each terrace has a gate and a wall in between. An enclosing wall is around 5 foot 3 inches high and has a 305 battlements for gun. So all along the 2 sides, there were battlements for the guns. It is entered by 11 gates. 4 are outer and 7 are inner. So there are 4 outer gates from both the sides, and there are 7 inner gates. So these are terraces, 7 terraces, and 7 gates to enter each level of the fort. At the north point within pistol shot of the main battery is the water system named Santa Cruz, major source of water, which was the major source of water. This is the north. The area within the fort walls is divided into 3 enclosures by 2 lines of bastion fortification, and each of the 7 bastions were named after a saint. This was built by Portuguese. 2 at the westward bastions, these are 2 main bastions here, were named as Sao Diego and Sao Francisco, and the others are Sao Pedro and Sao Inacio and Sao Felipe. The top of the hill is bastioned well and is surrounded by a parapet. So this is the top of the hill. Central part is the top of the hill. There is a large water rain cistern with the 3 mouths. Each one is 1 foot wide, and the ruins of the magazine. And there is a chapel inside the fort. The church was built in 1630, and which was basically for the use of army, and which was functional until 1728 till the Marathas won the fort, or the Peshways won the fort, which were the regional powers of this area. Because this fort was very strategically located, there were many siege and attempts of winning the fort happened between regional powers and the Portuguese. The fortification at the north of the eastern end reached down to the sea. At one time, it was an important Portuguese fort manned by 8,000 men and protected by 70 guns. And there are few inscriptions above the doorway of the highest part of the fort, which translate as no entries without fighting. So there are 3 Portuguese inscriptions, one over the doorway at the center at the highest part of the fort, and which reads that the castle was commanded and built by a Viceroy of India, Dom Felipe Mascarenhas. And another basically talks about the Miranda Henriques being a captain of Chaul, and he was finished the fort in 1680. So these are few interesting facts about the fort. This part almost reaches the sea, and there is a huge iron column at this particular corner where the ships may have anchored once upon a time. This is another fort of Murud Janjira. This is an island fort, very, very interesting fort. This is one of the most idle forts of island forts, Janjira, and it's known to be the strongest island forts of India, and it is rare honor of this being the only undefeated fort. So this is known as an invincible fort at the coast of Maharashtra, and nobody can ever win the fort. And why? Because the rulers were the Siddhis, which once were the Abyssinian slaves but became the rulers of the region because of their docile nature and they had an excellent knowledge of sea. And this is positioned so ideally, it is close enough to the shore, which allows relatively easy communication to the land and far enough to provide clear view of the sea from both defense and attack perspective. So it is one of the finest examples stating the use of geographical strategic location combined with the military tactics of architectural defense strategies. I'll just quickly go through the little historical background of this fort. And though the Janjira Island and the creek was known to the traders from very early times, the early history of place is not very well documented. So it appears that the place acquired its importance only after arrival of Siddhis. When the Bahmani kingdom was established in Deccan, the large number of Abyssinians were brought to India, and most of them were as slaves. They were known as Habshis in local language, and later the Siddhis. Originally, the term of respect and corrupted Urdu word of Said. Though the Habshis came to India as slaves, many of them rose to high position at the native courts entirely due to their courage, loyalty, their nature, docile nature, and the knowledge of the seas. So this is the wonderful fort, and this is the main door, which is very strategically located. If you see the sizes of the bastion and this door, it is very tricky to understand the main entrance. These are two water cisterns within the fort. There is a masjid inside. There are few stables. Then there are ruins of few palace areas. Then this is the highest point of the fort, and surrounded by bazaars, the houses of other military officials and officers. There are granaries, there is a settlement, there is ammunition, there is a small temple inside. And this is a very important feature. This is a Darya Darwaza. This is a gate towards the sea, and this is the gate towards the north. So even a landward attack happened, there was a gate towards the sea, which is a kind of a exit gateway. So these are the defense wall and the bastions. These are the some ruins. These are few religious structures inside, and administrative structures very strategically located at the highest point of the fort. And this is basically a hill within the fort, which is known as a Bale Killa in local language. Killa is fort and Bale Killa is a main fort. This is the wonderful photograph clicked by a local friend of mine who's a local photographer, and he keeps sending me this wonderful pictures of this fort. Architecture and special configuration of this fort being, this is an island fort, lies within just mouth of the Rajpuri Creek. Its mainland being 800-meter distance and east towards the east, and it's 1.6 kilometer towards the west. The fort is irregular shaped. It has taken a shape of the island itself, and it was known as Al Jazeera, like a pearl of the sea in the Urdu language. Irregular oval shaped, which is gripped by high walls. These walls are, high tide rise from 14 to 17 meter at times, and the low tide water recedes, leaving the rock foundation open where the walls are built dry. So the fort is spread over 125 acres with a diameter of about 800 meter. And circumference is around 2.5 kilometers. The highest peak of the island is about 65 meter high on the east side opposite Rajpuri. It is a large, beautiful, strategically planned entrance gateway. This is the main entrance, which is hidden between the two bastions with steps leading to the water. And on the western side facing the open sea, a small postern gate used for former years at times of siege, which leads into the wide masonry platform about 6 meters above the higher water mark. So this is the exit gate I was talking about. So this is a large platform. This platform was built in the form of semicircle stretching along the sea face, and it takes in and is covered by the bastions. So the walls are battlemented, strongly looped hole, have their faces covered with 19 bastions, 25 meter across and 10 meter deep. At the intervals about 27 meters. So these are 19 bastions, very strategically placed. The 27 meters is an approximate distance center to center in between them. And once there was various guns positioned in these bastion walls. And now there are very few, around three main guns are still located, and they are known guns. Various inscriptions are there in the fort, which narrate the story of the construction and how the fort was built, when the fort was built, the period under whose regime it was built, of various Siddhi rulers.
Now we see one of the beautiful forts of Vijayadurga, which is located at the southern part of Konkan, which is much at the south. Because of the monopoly of all the regional powers and foreign powers such as Siddhis and Portuguese on the Konkan coast, the local power, the local Marathas, understood the importance of the coast and they built this fort. This is named as Vijayadurg, and it's one of the oldest forts on the Sindhudurg coast, which was constructed in the regime of Raja Bhoj earlier in Shilaha dynasty in 13th century, which later Shivaji Maharaj won from Adil Shah of Bijapur in 1653, and he renamed it as Vijayadurga. That is a fort of victory. As then Hindu solar year's name as Vijay means victory. So earlier the fort encompassed area of around 5 acres and it was surrounded by sea from all 4 sides. But then some part of the sea was reclaimed and one side was connected to the land. So over the years, the eastern trench was reclaimed and the road was constructed thereon. Presently, the area of the fort is about 17 acres and it's surrounded by Arabian Sea, which has beautiful bastions in rounded shaped, and few of the bastions are within the sea. So this is a landward defense as well as seaward defense. Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj then extended the area of the fort by constructing 3 fort walls on the eastern side. So he understood the defense mechanism well from the seaside as well as the land side attacks, and then he constructed 3 extra walls from the land side protection. These 3 fortifications are of around 36 meters of height, and he also constructed 20 bastions of the fort wall. So what all bastions we see today are from the 17th century and constructed by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. This is the only fort of the 2 forts of Maratha kingdom where King Shivaji personally hoisted the saffron flag, which was dedicated to the Swarajya. Swarajya means independence from the Mughal rule. The other fort is Torna. So this fort was known as Easter Gibraltar, as this fort is impregnable for a long time like Gibraltar in Europe. This impregnable fort had some locational advantages. One such advantage is one of the creek located around 40 kilometers from the fort. So the big ships couldn't enter in the shallow waters of this creek, and hence Maratha warships were anchored in this particular creek, and these ships were invisible from the deep sea. So this was also kind of a hideout for the smaller trench, for the smaller boats and ships. And it was not very much visible from the main sea land. So this is a wonderful defense mechanism of the fort. We'll go to the next slide. This is Suvarnadurga Fort. Suvarna is literally means gold. So this is known as a golden fort. The fort is located on a small island in the Arabian Sea near Harane. Harane was a port town, and which is also one of the southern forts in southern Konkan, southern side of the Konkan. This fort includes another land fort, which is very small in area, is known as Kanakadurga. So this is also a system of defense where you have main fort in the sea. That's an island fort for the seaward defense, and another fort which is located just on little just on the land side, which is a secondary fort known as Kanak Durga, at the base of headland of Harne port on the coast. So building of this fort is credited to Sultan Adil Shah of Bijapur, and the forts were captured by Shivaji later on in 17th century, who was a founder of Maratha Empire. Subsequently, Shivaji and the Peshwas and the Angres further fortified the forts for the defense purposes. So the defense mechanism of this particular fort was always updating and upgrading through times and the needs. So the literal meaning of Suvarnadurga is a golden fort, as it was considered as the pride or the feather in the golden cap of Marathas, built for the Maratha Navy for defense purposes. The fort also had a shipbuilding facility. So this is one of the very important factor where, the shallow waters or in the creeks are the main advantages for the shipbuilding activities in this area. And the basic objective of establishing the fort was to counter enemy attacks, mainly by the colonists and also from the local chieftains. The image down, the image at the bottom, you can see the Kanakadurga located at the land side, which is not very much visible, but Suvarnadurga, the long bastion wall of Suvarnadurga is very much visible in the island. Where there is a low tide, you can actually see even the base of the fort. So in the past, the land fort and the sea fort were connected by the tunnel, but now it is defunct and there are no sources which says that it was. This is just a kind of a rumor or a oral story that the locals say. So the present approach is to the sea. Approach to the fort is by the boats and through the sea from the Harane port, and which is on the headland.
Part of ramparts, and this is a part of the defense wall. So there were three type of major bastion types which evolved over the time. The round shape, which is the oldest, but then this create a dead point. Then this type of triangular bastions came up, and then this type of diamond shaped bastions came up for the counter attacks. So ramparts are the walls around the place to be protected, basically, which is a distinction should be made between the two. So the rampart or the walls, whichever is necessary and important. A wall may be high or a low, but the top is rounded, the tapering of narrow with no flat surface where the men or a material can be moved. So these are the very thick rampart. And on the other hand, has a wide surface at the top, which is this, where the troops can patrol, moved, or even the guns are placed. So these are the bastions or the towers. The bastions were outward projections from the wall. The rampart are the normal shape of the forts, being Indian rulers were the round shaped, semicircular. For the Portuguese forts, they were more conical or triangular bastions, and with two very short side and a long side triangular outer portion was suitable for the gun firing. So this developed later. This is a strategic.
So this is basically a strategic location we were talking about. So the portion of land or a hilltop selected for the fort and fortification was dominantly as an elevated mass, and to provide a wide view of the field, whether it's a seaside or it's a land side, for surveillance and a defense purposes. So the height of the fortification walls are in proportion and differ as per the elevation of the land. So this is strategic location was a very important point in any defense structures came up along the coast. The gates, the coastal forts had normally two gates, one at the land side and other at the sea side. So this is a landward gate and this is a seaward gate. The main gate was always tucked away inside a fold of a wall or a bastion so that it could not be fired upon directly by any enemy. So it is basically in between two bastions, but quite tucked in within two bastions, so that it could not have fired upon or directly by any enemy ship or even a land-based cannons. In the land forts, this effect could not always be achieved. However, there were invariably at least two gates, one within the other, but so placed that the path between them was curved or it could be brought under the fire. So this was another phenomena where you have the sea, but the gate is much inside. And it was basically hidden between two bastions or the wall, like a curtain walls. So thus, even the enemy succeeded in breaking through the first gate. His passage of inner gate could be closely disputed. The land forts, the gate was often studded with spikes or to discourage battering by elephants, etc. But these gates were protected by the heavy kind of material. Then the parapet walls, the forward edge of rampart of parapet was built to basically protect the troops who patrolling upon. This is a Janjira, the picture of Janjira Fort parapet walls where the cannons are still placed. This is a fort of Janjira where you can see the Bale Killa, which is the highest elevated point in the fort. And these are two water systems, and this is a part of walls. The wall had basically ramparts and parapets, and it was built to protect the troops patrolling on the ramparts, which was normally 1 or 2 meter high and had a loophole, which is known as jangya. Loopholes to fire. The angle of loopholes determined the area that could be covered. Normally, 2 rows of loopholes were provided, or somewhere there are some fortified walls where we have more than 1 or 2, more than 2. One to cover close to the rampart, and another is cover the wider approach, basically. This is a wider, and these are the smaller ones. Then there are merlons, embrasures, and machicolations also on the parapet walls, which were never continuous or of the same height throughout the length. The merlons basically protected the soldiers standing behind it and firing on the enemy below. Embrasures were the opening between the merlons used for observation or mounting the guns. Then machicolations were small openings on the top of the gates and the entrance passages. So these were basically used to fire or commonly used to pour hot liquids, or basically the tactics, warfare tactics. And the enemy tried to burn the gate in such cases of water. So these were basically used to pour water or for defense purposes. And the regular part of the fort architecture, it basically evolved after 15th century in this coast. Then moat, which is next slide, please. This I yeah, the parapet and the machicolines. These are the photograph Janjira Fort, and see a few cannons there. The next slides, please. So this slide I'll about now. So the moat, the island forts had the sea to protect them from all the sides. But in the land forts, the ditch or a moat filled with water was protected from the landward side. So a moat is in fully sloped form is now rarely seen in this particular area. So almost all coastal fort had some kind of moat or a ditch, but facing the land side. So, and another important feature of the coastal forts are these sculptures. So these are very interesting sculptures, as this is a lion and he has 4 elephants under his paws. So the elephants depict the Marathas and the tiger depicts the Siddhis, and he's taken Marathas for a ride kind of a thing, depiction here. So especially either side of the main gate or the walls, the numerous sculptures are identified. So these have been described while documenting also the fort details. So the most common feature and the figures were eagle, that is a Garuda, the eagle, and the tortoise, the kurma, or even the tigers and the elephants. So the deity most commonly found was the Hanuman or a Maruti or a monkey god, and refers to avatars of Vishnu. So the elephants represented the strength of the ruler or of the structure, and the deity was installed to evoke his protection. And the fascinating sculpture seen in some forts that the tiger holding 4 elephants in its paws and one in his mouth. This is known as Ganda Bhirunda or a Vyaghra is in Sanskrit or in regional language. So these are the few important things. This is a next slide, please. Yes, this is a wonderful photograph of Fort Janjira, which is standing firmly on the island for most of almost 4 centuries. And the solid basalt wall with molten lead bearing constantly the turbulent waves of Arabian Sea. And this is the most significant and invincible fort of Maharashtra. So now to conclude my presentation, I would like to say that military architectural heritage is factual and a visual statement for the empires, as well as they are example of technology and socio-economics as well. So the cultural landscape and fortified military heritage of Maharashtra demonstrate natural defenses offered by the landscape and hills, valleys, rivers, creeks, and the sea, and defense forested, dense forested as well, forest areas as well. And they also feature extensive water harvesting structures inside as well, largely still in use. So these forts do not just represent military architecture or guerrilla warfare or defense techniques, but concept of living with the nature, surviving in the adversity and adapting to the changing circumstances. So they are not just see as an individual fort architecture, but it's basically an entire line of defense that we must see them as. So these are the coastal defenses of Maharashtra. And I conclude my presentation. I thank every one of you who was involved arranging this wonderful program, and such accomplished panels and even attendees. Thank you for bearing with me with a few glitches. And thank you very much once again, the university and all of you wonderful people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Who want to speak? Is there any questions to this very impressive
Shall I open up the discussion?
discussion? Yeah.
Thank you, Archana. It was really a fascinating presentation. And even being from India, I didn't know anything about it. So thank you for this knowledge, which was kind of hidden before. And I have so many questions and comments. I don't know how far. I mean, we have time, so I'll just open up with 5 broad pointers, which is in my mind, and we can start the discussion with it. So coming from a human geography background, my question would be about the not exactly how the physical features of geography that shaped the construction of the fort. But the first question is about the power relation between the local rulers and the maritime forces who are coming from Portugal and Africa and all these places. So how the first question is around how the power negotiation took place, because the forts, at least the two main forts, the Korlai one and the Zanzira one, they were built by foreign powers. Portuguese and Siddhis were interestingly slaves, but became the rulers. So this is a very interesting transition. So I'm just interested to know how the negotiation with the local Maratha, the Peshwas, with the foreign rulers, that manifested into building this magnificent forts. So that was the first. The second one is about the craftsmanship of the fort.
One by one, could we go one by one?
Yeah, sure.
The first question, that's how the foreign powers negotiated with the locals. So basically, Marathas or Peshwa never the locals were the Koli, were the fishermen of this region, and they were considered as a native regional powers. And then the more towards the Western Ghats were the regional powers, which were established regional powers, like Bahmani Sultanates or even Maratha Kingdom. And after Maratha, there were Peshwas, then the Angres and the Savans, which came up. So Angres and Savans were the local regional powers initially, but they came to existence only after Portuguese and Siddhis came into power. So these Portuguese and Siddhis were the ones who knew the importance of trade, and when they established themselves with with the help of few fishermen, then the established powers towards the eastern side of the coast, they realized the importance of trade, and then they started establishing themselves and started fighting towards this with this foreign powers. So that is why most of the forts I said were built by Portuguese, because they were the ones who came initially, and the later powers, they just strengthened and restored the existing ones. So the story of Janjira goes like, there was a fisherman named Ramakori. He had just a wooden bastion on the island, but the entire part was with the Nizam. So when they wanted to build a fort or do the trading activities, they took over the fort. They took over the small bastion built by that Ramakori, and which was a wooden fort initially. Then they came. Then the Siddhis were basically deployed to build the fort for Nizam. But eventually, they became the rulers. Siddhis became the
That's very interesting. So power was already quite decentralized in that region.
Definitely.
So
that is conflict, because there was a lot of commerce going on. Even the internal trade was depend on the trade which was going on at the coast.
So actually, it reminded me of the power negotiation that took place when British East India Company came to the eastern coast. They had to buy the rights of those 3 villages from the local zamindar, the local landlord. So here it was the fishermen from whom the Portuguese kind of negotiated. And you actually insinuated the second question already, that is the craftsmanship of the forts, and who were the planners and architects who built the fort, who's not only who kind of designed it, but who made it. Can you just reflect a bit upon that?
There are very distinctive styles of construction in this region. The way I said, most of the forts were built by Portuguese. They have high towers, they have conical shaped bastions. And because when Portuguese came, they came with the guns. So the warfare were very specific. They built accordingly. Even the port towns you see today, you will see a lot of ruins, but all of them were a very significant construction style, not in terms of material or the construction system, but architectural vocabulary which they brought here was very foreign.
So it was
So
a Portuguese plan completely.
and in many areas of Konkan, even if you see the temple culture and or even the around temple, there are few elements such as a light hose or to put a light. We call it a deep mala. So that is also a very influenced by the Portuguese architecture vocabulary. And in other areas, like towards the Western Ghats, towards the landward side of the Western Ghats, you see a very different kind of architectural vocabulary. So Konkan in a way is very distinctive. And even today, the people are very welcoming. So they were very welcoming even to the foreign powers.
And it was made by the local craftsmen, or the Portuguese builder brought their own?
They definitely appointed local craftsmen because you see local materials such as basalt, which is known as a khandki stone in local language. That is a black basalt, which is supposed to be a very hard stone. And they did a dry construction at the coastal side because the lime wouldn't have last, but at some part of these forts, lime is used, and the molten lead, basically.
Right.
So we call it otiv shisa. That is a molten lead, which really lasted long for like more than 300-400 years now.
That's great. I think I would, Datyar, if you want to raise your question here.
Could you please chat later on and email me, because I've missed my other, the other presentation which was going on. I've missed what people may have asked or something. So
we don't yet have anything in the Q&A section. So
No.
I think we're just asking things to you directly here. So yeah.
I have a question about the history of the research. There are some ground floor maps from Walter de Gruyne in Co. Berlin, 1964. Was there a specially research project for when this floor plans was created?
this is from the book. And this is by the Walter D. Gruyter and Co. Berlin, 1964. And this particular plans I've received from a friend of mine who had come from Great Britain, and he had this book. And the name of the book is basically Walter D. Gruyter and Co. And I have a reference of this I can share, but the source is basically Chaul. The name of the book is Chaul.
Mm-hmm.
So he has written a book on it.
All right, thank you. I think David.
The next one is David.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I've got a question about scale issues here in a way, and there's this fascinating issue, thinking about the way in which you talk about these connections, local connections between sea and land, connections between India and globally as well. This fascinating set of connections, and it's really interesting the way you've outlined how we must see these fortresses in a unified sense rather than as a set of individual examples. I guess from a heritage studies perspective, I'm just thinking about how the forts are managed today, and I'm thinking about the issues of whether they are managed as a singularity, or are there sort of 20 different stories going on with 20 different forts, 73 different stories with 73 different forts. And I was wondering what sort of, you brought the story together so well, and I'm just thinking, if I was a visitor on the ground and came there and saw how these places were managed and how the state authorities, for instance, whether they see these in a unified sense and in terms of the connections, or is it completely fractured?
I have a question which can just add on to David's question. I think, Archana, if you can take this in together, because I know quite a few transnational heritage initiatives by the former trading powers like Danish powers as well in India, in Tranquebar, in Srirampur. So whether there are any initiative from the Portuguese government in reclaiming the heritage that they have left behind, or is it solely managed by the national heritage, if we have anything? But yeah, just that.
Very good questions. Basically, all these forts are basically, most of them are with the way I mentioned, with Archaeological Survey of India, and the forts are a few of the forts. The most of the forts are with State Archaeology of Maharashtra. So there are two basically under ASI, State Archaeology comes. So, but these are two separate bodies on a central level, and what David asked, whether they are seen as, you know, a lineage or they see as individuals. So today, yes, they are seen as individuals, but there is a Bombay Port Trust, even a Maritime Heritage Society. There are few, you know, non-governmental organizations which are doing their research and their part for this heritage in terms of documentation, and even the areas which comes in the buffer of this fort. The most interesting part is now, just this year, we have, you know, we have 14 forts listed in a serial nomination in tentative list of World Heritage, like UNESCO World Heritage nomination. So we are in the tentative list now, and there is 14 forts in the serial nomination, which is the first time in India. And this is what we are, you know, very strongly we want to put forth. Forts are not to be seen as an individual fort architecture, defense architecture, but whole system of Maratha warfare, you know, regional powers which came into existence and which were handed over by the powers, and how they later add the original one. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. Basically, are now the livelihood. So the way Jira or the Korlai, the way I explained, they have a very unique ethnic community which has their own language. Language as well as the foreign language. They even have the carols. Their livelihood depends on these forts, because of there are fishing activities, there is a salt pains around, then there are you know, agricultural related activities, and even making of local beer and some oil which acts as a you know, lifelonging material for the fishing boats. So, and even for the Janjira, you know, the local people of Janjira, they consider themselves as descendants of Siddhis, and they are the one, because there is no proper route to reach these island ports. So these are few fishermen or even a boat sailor, they take visitors to they get them back. So these kind of visitor activities also. So their livelihood is very dependent on these ports.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right now, they are seen as individuals, but project launched by government of Maharashtra is this of the seaforts through a ship for the visitors. So this is in plan. This is into a planning with the transport department of even center and even the government of Maharashtra. So maybe in the future we will get to see some jetties and, you know, some
thank you.
Packages. You're welcome, David.
I think the next one is Katrin.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for this very interesting lecture. So I got a very technical question about the two water tanks that works of Janjira for. Well, on the photos, they seem to be open on the top. So I'm wondering, can you tell us something about the buildings and how they were filled and how the water, I guess how it was protected from impurities, please?
Okay, hi Kathy, thank you for the question. And it's a wonderful question because this fort was inhabited till 1983. And when it was handed over to ASI in 1985, this fort became, turned into, and only during monsoons, like 4 months of monsoons, this habitated. But throughout the year, this was inhabited fort. There are people who are still live in the nearby areas who used to live on the fort till 1983, 1985. And interestingly, this fort has 2 water systems. And these are water systems of drinkable water. And the water system had a beautiful palace around it, which was 7-storied high. And it was a very well planned. And the way I said, it was throughout the year, this was inhabited, but only 4 months of monsoons it was not, because the monsoon of this area is heavy.
So we can imagine that it was a round structure that was dug into the rock, the ground of the fortress. Was there any internal, I don't know, structure to hold it, like some engineering stuff, or was it really just, can we imagine it was like an open hole that was filled?
Okay, very interesting. So these are basically spurs of Western Ghats which create island in the sea. So these islands were basically rocky islands. And on the rocky islands, these bastions were built. And using the same rock which was inside, the internal structures were built. So right now, the Bale Killa, which is a central high point, which is a elevated ground, which is the original elevated ground within the island. And the use of geography was used it such a way that the central part became the king's seat or the king's palace, and the all area around it became the bazaars or the religious places, or even the settlement, the other settlement. So I have shared my PDF, and you could see the plan of Janjira, where I have shown that, everything is in the ruins now. But it was built in a very well mannered, as per the geography of the island goes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is Tu Wan Shu.
Thank you, Ashana. Congratulations. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. So I have 2 questions in the issue of water supplying to island fort. It's a little bit same questions from Catherine. As far as I understood, was it collected from the rainwater, or is it welled up from itself? That's the first question. And the second question is about fortification system. Is very unique characteristics. You explained to us at first the coastal fort, hill fort, and the island fort is one system as a group.
Yes.
For that, did they have so long tradition from ancient times? That was the second question.
Okay. So also another interesting question, because see, the entire Western Ghats is made up of 2 types of stone. One is basalt and another is laterite. Laterite is considered as the most porous stone. It soaks water, and it basically collects water table at the end of the strata. So silent forts also have made up of these two stratas. Basalt stone, that is a trap we call, which is the hardest stone, which is non-porous. And another is laterite stone, which is the most porous stone you find in Maharashtra. So basically, this collects the rainwater and which retains it. Because the lowermost strata is basalt, that is non-porous. So all the water is collected. So if you see Konkan coast, even if it is close to the coast, that is a salty water, you have number of wells, which are the drinkable water, that is the sweet water wells. Even in the forts, even on the forts, even on the coastal forts, even at the mouth of the creeks, or even in the Konkan region. There are many, many wells, and these wells are documented. Every house has a well. Though it's close to the coast, every house has a well. And one more thing, the way I said that how Western Ghats loses its heights toward the coast, so all the water basically it percolates entirely through the Western Ghats and it collects at the coastal wells. So this is also a very interesting phenomena of the Konkan coast, that every house has a well.
Okay, thank you.
And your second question is the group of forts. Yes. So this is also a very unique feature of forts of where we have a main fort, then there is a ring of second forts, and there is another ring of outposts, or outposts are basically catered to local needs. Main fort was basically as a vital point, defense for the vital point. Secondary forts were basically for the weaponry and to support the outpost as well as main fort. So this system you will find at the entire coastline. So one fort at the sea, one is at the coast, and one at the hill. So that is why in a physiographic map also I have explained that how is the coast first. So there are some beaches, there are some rocky outcrops, there are some cliffs where the sea is meeting at the cliffs. So this was the very important advantage of geography, and that is how the history shaped up. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
Thank you for your explanation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luciana. I don't see further questions, neither in the Q&A session nor here in the chat. So once again, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you very much, dear colleagues, for your contributions. I leave the chance for the famous last words to David.
Well, just it's been wonderful to finally to hear this, because I was looking forward to this right back in the winter time. It seems such a long time ago now, but it's really good to finally get to meet you, and it's really nice to see Catherine and Do-Won as well, to sort of make the connections and feel there is a community around the world who are talking about these subjects. I'm always amazed at just how many connections there are actually, and I find as people who've watched a few of these now, that I'm going to ask a question about scale and geography and about heritage management, because that's what I tend to do. And we're starting to play different roles, and I think it's fascinating how this program can work across all these boundaries across the world, especially at this moment where we're all stuck behind boundaries and our own little forts. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much too.
Thank you, Archana.
Thank you, everyone. Accomplished a lot. Thanks a lot. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Rainer, for your constant support. Thank you, David. Thank you, Dita.
It's wonderful how to see. Yeah, this is based in Christmas last year. With Rainer, Dr. Christian Ottersbach, and me is growing. It's wonderful. I like it. Thank you very much.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for today. We'll do the post-processing and send an email with a link to you all.
Keep staying healthy.
And you.
Yeah. Good night to South Korea.
Bye.
Bye.